Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of virtual online programs from Cooperstown, New York, not too far from the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We thank you for being with us today for a virtual librarian spotlight with Jim Gates, the Hall of Fame's librarian since 1995, 25 years ago. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. I work in the Education Department. Glad to be your host for today's program and these other programs that we have been doing. Some of you, I'm sure many of you, have seen some of our curator spotlights in past weeks. We've talked about exhibits. Well, we've gotten a little bit tired of talking to the curators. We've given them so much airtime. We're going to put them aside for a week, and we're going to change course a little bit. We're going to talk about a place where I used to work. When I started at the Hall of Fame way back in 1995, I was a researcher at the National Baseball Hall of Fame Library. It was just about, about a year or two, I think, before the Research Center was named for the commissioner, A. Bartlett Giamatti. We're going to talk about that, the history of the library, what has gone on since Jim Gates became the librarian, the director of the library, in 1995. We have a lot to cover. We will take your questions for Jim Gates a bit later on. But first, let's welcome to the virtual librarian spotlight, Jim Gates, longtime Orioles fan, longtime librarian at the Hall of Fame. Jim, thanks for being with us today. How have you been during this baseball stoppage, as I call it?
Well, like everyone else, Bruce, I've been stuck at home and making the best of it, trying to keep busy. There's plenty of work to do, but I can't wait to get back in the office and can't wait to get a haircut.
Yes. I've gotten desperate in those, in that particular area. I had my daughter, Madeline, actually give me a miniature haircut the other day, and it went fairly well. So I'm trying to improve the appearance for these programs. We're having to make do as best we can during what has been going on in America and the world for the last couple of months. Today we're going to talk about a place, the National Baseball Hall of Fame Library, that was once known as the National Baseball Library. We'll talk about the evolution of the building. The Hall of Fame itself goes back to the year 1939. That is when the Hall of Fame officially opened to the public for the first time. And then in 1966, we had the creation of the Hall of Fame Library, at the time known as the National Baseball Library. So Jim, let's go back in history just a little bit. Here's a classic portrait, if you will, of the National Baseball Library. I'm guessing that this photo was taken somewhere around late 60s, early 70s, and it was actually taken during an induction ceremony because for many years the induction was held right on the front steps of the library in the place that is known as Cooper Park. Jim, if you will, tell us what was the impetus for the building of the library at this time, back in 1966?
Well, back when the Hall of Fame opened in 1939, they started the library. It was sponsored by minor league baseball, then known as the National Association of Professional Baseball Leagues. They provided both some documents, some books, and some funding to begin the library. So there was a couple of shelves of book, and that grew over time. 1966, the collection was of sufficient size that it needed its own building, and so they put up the structure that still exists today. It continued to grow, and in 1994, an addition was added to the back of the building, which also connected it to the main museum. So through 3 different phases, we now have grown to the point where we can safely house a collection of several million documents and publications.
So we see what the library looked like back in the early days. Again, this is late 60s, early 70s. Here's what the library looks like today, and really not that much different. Obviously, there's no crowd when this picture was taken. The induction is no longer held in Cooper Park on the front steps of the library. But the building itself, architecturally, looks pretty much like it always has.
Yeah, the facade there has remained the same. You can see off to the right the connecting part to the main museum. Yes. They did hold the ceremonies there for quite a few years, But the Cooper Park area can only hold about 8,000 to 9,000 people. And of course, the ceremony has grown much beyond that. So it was moved out to the Clark Sports Center back around 1990, and it's been there ever since.
Now, you started at the Hall as the director of the library, the librarian, in July of 1995. How has the library staff grown, both in terms of size and skill, since you started with the library?
Well, historically, the library had a small staff. They were kept very busy answering a lot of questions from the media. But in today's internet-based world, we get questions, in the U.S. mail, over the telephone, via email and text and whatever you can think of. So the staff has grown to respond to that, but we also have a lot of professional skills now. We have a number of our staff are professionally trained with master's degrees in the care and maintenance of the collection, in cataloging, and all the different skills that are required to operate a modern archives.
Let's talk a little bit about an important feature within the Hall of Fame library, and that is the Giamatti Research Center. Here is the front door to the Research Center, which is actually adjacent to the Hall of Fame bookstore, and then the bookstore itself adjacent to the library atrium. So folks can actually walk in and do research there. Tell us what you remember about the dedication of the Giamatti Research Center. I was working there at the time, but frankly, it's so long ago, I don't remember all the details. You probably remember better than I do.
Oh, yes. It was very busy time. During his brief tenure as commissioner of baseball, Giamatti started the fundraising campaign to pay for the new building. And it was through his efforts that the institution was able to acquire enough funding to pay for the climate-controlled storage rooms, the Giamatti Center, the bookstore, the bullpen theater, all those facilities that we're still using today. At the time, Don Marr was president of the Hall of Fame, and we decided that it would be appropriate to name the Research Center in his honor, given his background in academics at Yale University and other institutions. And so that was about, 1997 or 1998. We had a formal ceremony, a ribbon cutting. Some of the Giamatti family were there. There was a lot of people. It was done on induction weekend, and it's been a busy place ever since.
Yeah, Bartlett Giamatti was a fascinating man. He was not just a baseball executive and administrator. He was a literary scholar. He was a writer. He was somebody that really appreciated not only research and a scholarly approach to things, but he had a very strong appreciation of fine arts. He was not in some ways what you would consider maybe a typical baseball executive.
He was a scholar of the Italian Renaissance, and he appreciated through his own research what archivists can do to make it possible to expand our knowledge of whatever topic you're working on. And he showed that appreciation by taking a personal interest in our library.
Did you ever have the chance to meet him?
No, I did not. I've met several members of his family, but he had passed away prior to my arrival in Cooperstown.
Let's talk a little bit about the photograph, the image on the right-hand side of your screen. That's the interior of the Giamatti Research Center. So that's the room that you come into right when you enter that front door. And on this particular day, a very busy day in the Research Center. What's a typical summer day like in the Giamatti Center, Jim? Tell us how busy it can get, kinds of researchers that show up, what kind of assistance does the staff offer?
Well, our manager of research services is Cassidy Lent, and she usually has some intern assistants in the summer, which can be the busiest time of year, but everything is cyclical when it comes to baseball research. During the summer, we have, baseball fans coming in on an hourly basis, just to ask basic questions. We're also getting questions over the telephone and via the internet from sports writers who are working on stories. But once you move past the summer and enter the school year, we start to get a lot of questions from school children working on projects, from college students working on research papers. And then, of course, book authors are working with us year-round on their various projects. So you never know what the next question is going to be. We've had questions, one minute it's from a third grader, the next minute a speechwriter from the White House is calling to ask a question about something they want to put into a presidential speech. We also get calls from, drunks at bars with $20 bets writing on the question. So you never know if it's going to be the White House or Joe's Bar and Grill on the telephone.
Now, what we see in the photograph here are some long tables that have been put together. Those are where the researchers essentially sit. They work at those stations there. You might notice some computer screens off to the left, and just above and to the right of that is a great portrait of Casey Stengel. You can then see the reference desk toward the back of the room, right in front of that beautiful mural of Cooperstown. So all of this activity located in this one area. And this would be a particularly busy day. What we see in the photo here, you've got about 4 or 5 researchers at the table. You've got some folks up at the reference desk. So likely this is either taking place, probably in the summer, maybe right before induction weekend, that time of year.
Yeah, I think this was taken in the days leading up to the 19th Century Conference meeting. Those look like some of the folks who are associated with that program. And you mentioned the painting of Casey Stengel, who is the patron saint of the library staff, because as he used to say, hey, you can look it up.
It's a great painting. I remember when I first started at the Hall of Fame, that painting was kind of in an area not seen by many people. It was right next to the elevator, but now it's in the Giamatti Center and much more visible to people. Let's talk a little bit about the tours that are offered. In addition to research, tours are available to select groups. Here you're leading a tour not on the first floor, but you're actually up in the research department on the second floor of the library. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, our membership department has something called the VIP Experience Program. And for people who join at a certain level, they offer a 2-day event called the VIP Experience. You would come on a Thursday and get some private time in the museum on Thursday evening. And then on Friday, we do 2 different events. One is a library tour and the other is an artifact spotlight, which I think you've done on quite a few occasions with these groups. The library tour consists of a walk through the Giamatti Center where we talk about what our staff does and what we collect and how we operate. And then we go up to the second floor, which is the staff work area, where we talk about the collections that are up there, and we often have some special documents that we bring out to show them, items such as the scorecard from a perfect game, or Bobby Thompson's home run, or documents related to the sale of Babe Ruth from Boston to New York. So it's fun to show those things off. Our goal is to collect as much as we can that documents the history of baseball at every level of the game. And we don't collect it to gather dust in the basement. We want people to use it. We want people to see it.
Jim, right next to you, there is some shelving and some red-bound volumes. Tell us about those.
Those are, we have a complete set of Sports Illustrateds, and those are the early volumes. Everybody knows, the famous picture of Eddie Matthews that appears on volume 1, issue 1, but what people don't know is there were 3 practice issues before that, and only 3 copies of those were created, and one of which was donated to us. So in addition to the copies that everybody else can see, we have those practice issues as well. So you never know what treasures you're going to find in our library.
Toward the back of the photo, we see some higher shelves. What are located there?
We have a complete set of all the media guides produced for all the major league teams, going back to the earliest days, 1920s or 30s, when they would issue a pamphlet that had a roster and a schedule. And that was pretty much it, where today there are 300 and 400 page books that are produced every year that give a complete history of the team. There's also some gray boxes up on top of the shelves. Those have box scores that are in scrapbook pages that go back to the 1870s. Once upon a time, they were very heavily used, but a lot of that material is available on the internet now, and it's free to everybody. And so we just run the baseballreference.com or retrosheet.org to get that same information that we used to go through scrapbooks for.
Now, not visible in the photograph, and it's kind of to the right and behind where you are, the very large black cabinets. And tell us about the important files that are housed there.
Those are the clipping files. We try to keep a clipping file on every person who's played a single pitch of Major League Baseball. There are also some selected minor leaguers and then other personalities such as owners, umpires, announcers, broadcasters, authors, actors, anyone who's been involved in baseball history where there's been some documents produced. We try to keep it on file and readily available. They're among the heaviest used items in our collection, and it's not unusual for a book author to come over a 2-week period and go through 400 or 500 of those files.
Well, I know in writing Card Corner over the years for the Hall of Fame website, those files come in especially handy, and I've used them very often. You always find some things that you're really surprised, and they come from so many different newspaper and magazine sources. They're a lot of fun to look through.
They're
Let's talk a
well known
little
in the
bit.
baseball research community, and people are asking for them all the time.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about some of the dignitaries that you've taken around on tours at the Hall of Fame. I know this was a special thrill for you, being somebody with a library background. This was a day when you were visited. The Hall of Fame library was visited by Dr. Carla Hayden, she from the Library of Congress. Tell us about this.
Well, she is the Librarian of Congress and the first African-American, the first woman, and the first librarian to be the Librarian of Congress in almost 80 some years. So it was a thrill for our staff to have her visit and to be able to show her our collection. Of course, she's a great baseball fan, so I think she had a very good time during the visit. But over the years, I've had the opportunity to meet and provide tours for members of Congress, cabinet officers. One day we had President Clinton and Hillary Clinton, who was then the US Senator, visit, and we gave them a tour. Actors, actresses from Hollywood have come through, book authors. I mean, the people we get to meet at the Hall of Fame, I know you've had the opportunity as well. I mean, it's incredible who comes through our facility.
And I'll be the first to admit, I get nervous taking some of these people around. It's a thrill, but it can be nerve-wracking too, because you want to make a good impression.
It can be very nerve-wracking, particularly in some cases where they have TV cameras on you.
Now, is Dr. Hayden looking at the day-by-day records here?
Yes, she is.
Okay, we're going to talk about those later.
Looking at the day-by-days for Jackie Robinson in 1947.
Excellent, excellent. Here is another interesting event for you, a visit by a Hall of Famer. This, I believe, may have been during Hall of Fame weekend, but we do occasionally get Hall of Famers who come through. And here the library actually put a temporary exhibit together to show some of the Hall of Famers, some of the dignitaries. What do you remember about the day when you helped out Joe Torre?
Well, Joe came through. It was, we had a special meeting for the baseball owners and people from the commissioner's office. We had set up a special tour, and we had a lot of the owners coming through, and that is one of Babe Ruth's personal scrapbooks that Christy Walsh made. And Joe took a great interest in that, had a number of questions about what was in it, how we took care of it. I think he spent quite a bit of time with those scrapbooks and seemed to enjoy himself very much.
Now, I noticed that both you and Joe Torre are wearing the white gloves. For those not familiar, why exactly is that done?
Well, we have the option of wearing white gloves or latex gloves these days, but whenever you touch an artifact, you have oil and dirt on your fingers, and you don't want to have that transferred to the material. So we collect material to preserve it, and we preserve it by handling it as little as possible. And when we do have to handle it, we try to wear gloves.
Now, Joe Torre is just one of many Hall of Famers that you have kind of showcased the Hall of Fame library to. You've been there available to answer questions. Tell us about a few of the other playing greats that have come through the library over the years.
Well, we did an event back in 1996 that included Brooks Robinson. And as an Oriole fan, Brooks was one of my heroes growing up. And to be able to spend some time with him was a real treat. And my son Sean got to meet him, which was just, I still remember that very clearly. I got to do a television program with Ozzie Smith one time on baseball and physics, and Ozzie was fantastic. He had actually taken a physics class in college, and he was right on top of the topic. And it was, a memorable week down in Florida when we did that program. But we do the orientation program for the new inductees when they come through. So over the years, I've gotten to meet quite a few of the Hall of Famers, and it's always a treat. And sometimes you get non-Hall of Fame players coming through with their families. They want to see their files. They want to see what we do. You get people like Ichiro Suzuki, who's been here 4 or 5 times now. And he comes in the winter, and he does spend some time in the library and likes to see the old material on some of the great hitters in the past. He seldom wants to see his material. He's always looking at stuff from Rogers Hornsby or Ted Williams and people like that.
And let's talk a little more specifically about the collection. Here we see the Central Archive, which is located down in the basement, the lower floor. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you had mentioned earlier when the Hall of Fame opened initially, they did collect some library items. And then, of course, they had collected enough that they were motivated to build the library in '66. What was initially collected by the Hall of Fame, and how has it changed? How has it expanded in terms of the kinds of paper documents that you bring in?
Well, from the earliest days, collecting baseball books was a basic goal, and newspapers, scorecards, programs, the miscellany of the game. That continues to this day. There's really no restriction. Anything that documents baseball anywhere in the world is a target for us to collect. We try to avoid too much duplication. We only have so much space, so we have to turn down a lot of things that are offered because we already have them. But unique items, and it does go beyond the printed material. We do collect recorded media, oral histories, movies, things of that nature. But the core of the collection is always going to be the printed material, which is a basic foundation for any library and archive.
Since you came aboard in 1995, and again, that was the year that I started at the Hall of Fame as well, there have been some interesting collections that have come into the library. One that comes to mind, the extensive papers of the former commissioner, the late Bowie Kuhn.
Yes. One day a truck arrived, and it was just loaded with material. We brought that into the building, and then back in the mid-90s, just after I arrived, Bowie came up and spent 2 weeks in the library with Tim Wiles and myself, and we went through every box that he donated, and he kind of gave us some background on it. Since then, our manuscript archivist, Claudette Scrafford, has organized it and cataloged it, and we've housed it into archival boxes. It's now on the shelves, and it's available for researchers to use.
Let's talk a little bit about this photograph. Again, it's down in the basement, if you will, the lower level of the Hall of Fame. Here we see the movable compact shelving, and this features a portion of the book collection. Tell us about the archive and the kinds of measures that you and the staff take to make sure these items are preserved.
Absolutely. We have multiple climate-controlled storage rooms in the lower level of the building. The Central Archive houses books, some scrapbooks, other printed material. And to some people, this picture may look like it's a little unkempt down there, but those pieces of paper you see sticking out of the shelves are just slips that we put in there for staff when they borrow a book, so that we know where they are and we can put them back. That the books themselves are not hanging over the shelves improperly. We also have a photo archive. We have a walk-in cooler where glass plate negatives and slides are kept. There's a recorded media archive and a manuscript archive. Each of these rooms has an independent climate control system that keeps the temperature and humidity for that format. So it varies from room to room, and it's all computer controlled. And when people are not in the room, the lights are out so that it's dark. So it's dark and cool, and humidity is kept just optimal for each of the collections.
So for the book collection, about what temperature is ideal?
The cooler, the better, but usually it's in the lower 70s. But if you can get it cooler, that does fine. Some of the rooms they're not very human friendly. The photo archive, if you're going to work in there for very long, you want to have a jacket on.
Yeah.
Same thing in the recorded media collection, but cool, and you don't want fluctuations. Fluctuations in humidity in particular cause damage to library materials. So keeping everything steady is the key goal.
On the surface, this seems like a daunting task. How do you organize such a massive collection? Clippings, paper documents, books, magazines, newspapers, photographs. Where do you begin?
Well, we've got a lot of great people on our staff. It's a team effort, and there's no way you can do it without a lot of good people working on these collections. The books are organized by the Library of Congress call number system. There's a catalog with author, title, subject, and keyword search capabilities. That's on the internet. You can search that from your home. The photographs traditionally have been kept in files alphabetically by player, but our photo archivist, Kelly Bogan, is reorganizing those as we're able to scan and digitize those. We're putting them back into the original order of receipt. The manuscript collections we have an in-house system for numbering them, and as those are scanned and made available online, you can just access them via the computer. But we do keep master records on everything, and we can retrieve them roughly in a short amount of time for researchers as they're needed.
Now, in terms of acquisition, donation, purchase, or a combination of the two?
It's massively through donation. The collection has been built over the last 80 years through donations. We have a small budget to buy some new books for reference and research purposes, but over time, it's donations is the only way this collection can be built.
Let's talk about some of these specific items that are featured here. Here's a great photo of you, again, on the second floor of the Giamatti Research Center. And here you're working with the day-by-day records, which I know are a cherished part of the collection to you. Tell us about these.
Well, this is up on the second floor, and you can see the clipping files behind me that we were talking about earlier. But the volume in front of me is what is formerly known as the official average volumes. We call them the day-by-days, and that's what they are known through the baseball research community. That is because at the end of a game, in the old days, the official scorer would send in a tally sheet to the league office where somebody working in the league office, usually a clerical person, would handwrite each day's statistics for every player onto these sheets. And they're organized alphabetically by team, and then within team alphabetically by player, so that you can see the day-by-day hitting and pitching statistics for every player in the major leagues. And these were the official numbers. Tom Schieber, one of our curators, has used them to create a wonderful exhibit up on the third floor on the history of statistics. There are mistakes in them, as you might expect from anything that was done by hand by human beings. But they are the foundation document for statistics on baseball history. We did get a government grant back in the late 90s where they were microfilmed, and copies of the microfilm have been made available to RetroSheet and to Sabre and to the Elias Sports Bureau. And they have been using those for years now to identify errors and to help rebuild the official statistics of the game.
Now, this is the Jackie Robinson day-by-day record in the photo?
Yes, that is one of my favorites to use for tours. And as you can see, those pages have been covered with Mylar so that I don't do any damage to them over time as we like to show them off.
About when did they switch from doing these in a handwritten way to a computerized format?
They began to experiment with computers back in the 70s, and by the 80s, the bound volumes that are part of this collection are computer printouts. And then as you move into the 90s and into the new millennium, it's all done online. And you can go, to half a dozen different sources these days and get the official statistics that are being produced.
We'll talk about another interesting item that the library collects. This is a scorecard, also part of a magazine for not a major league team, but for a team in the All-American League.
Oh, yes. Back when I started, we had a fairly weak collection of material on the AAGPBL, and this was just after the movie A League of Their Own came out, and there was a great interest in this topic. And Tim Wiles kind of tackled this one, and he started a nationwide hunt for material on the AAGPBL. Was very successful in pulling this together, and we now have an extensive archive of programs and photographs and oral histories and questionnaires and all the publications that we can get our hands on. We've had quite a few people coming in to use this collection now. And I would give credit to Helen Stiles and Claudette Scrafford on our staff for organizing and cataloging all this material so that it is accessible to the research world.
Now, we just see the cover here, but you have the entire magazine and scorecard. But just the cover alone has all sorts of great information. It's 10 cents for one of these magazines. Yeah. The Lassies played at something called CAA Stadium. And there's an advertisement for Westinghouse. And is that a refrigerator on the front
refrigerator on the left and a black and white console TV on the right.
Yes, they did used to exist, black and white TVs. I remember them well.
I grew up watching the game of the week on those things.
Yeah. To me, that's one of the fascinating things about paper-based documents is that, yeah, there's a lot of baseball to be found, but there's also so much of American popular culture as well.
We've had students come up from New York City who are studying advertising or fashion, and they go through some of the old programs and scorecards and magazines to see what was being advertised to baseball fans. And some movie producers have used that material to help design, background material or clothing for the people, the extras in their movies and things like that. So you never know how these documents are going to be used by people.
Here we have another very interesting item. You wouldn't necessarily associate comic books with libraries, but comic books are an important part of the collection.
Yeah, we've always had a few comics in the collection, and then back about, I want to say 15, maybe 20 years ago, we got a call from a gentleman in Phoenix, Arizona, who was retiring as an engineer. He had collected baseball-themed comic books for most of his life, and he and his wife were downsizing, and he had to get rid of some of his stuff, and he offered us this comic book collection, which we were more than happy to have. It arrived, and there were, I want to say, about 500 of them, wow. Which have all been added to our collection now, and again, are available to researchers who need to use them.
Obviously well aware of Mel Allen, but never knew there was a Mel Allen sports comic. I assume this was part of a series.
There were a number of series. There was a group with Jackie Robinson. I believe Ted Williams had a series. There were several like Boy's Life type comic book series that were produced that had different ball players on the cover, and it's kind of fun to go through those.
This is an example of one of my favorite pieces that you can find in the library, cartoons from newspapers. Tell us about this one.
We have a lot of the original drawings done by some of the well-known artists who did cartoons for newspapers. Once upon a time, when the newspaper was the premier source of news for Americans, you had the sports writer, the sports photographer, and the sports cartoonist almost had equal standing within the journalism world. And over time, their artistry has been accepted as kind of an important piece of Americana. And we've been able to collect hundreds and hundreds of these. And we're currently working on a new donation from the Gallo family that will add about 400 more cartoons to the collection. So it's kind of fun to go through those and to see the different perspectives that these cartoonists, who were all baseball fans, had when they were producing this work. This goes back to the 20s and 30s, all the way up into the 70s and 80s. So there's quite a span of time over which these cartoons were made.
Now, this Gallo cartoon is from 1979, and this was just before Willie Mays was about to be inducted. Also, that same ceremony, Dick Young received the J.G. Taylor Spink Award for Writing Excellence. And of course, both of these folks heavily connected to the New York sports scene. Bill Gallo was the longtime cartoonist for the New York Daily News. Yep. So you have a lot of Gallo, and I imagine you have a lot of Willard Mullen as well.
Those are the two big names that we have. And of course, now that I have to think about it, the names are escaping me, but Gallo, we probably have more of his cartoons than any other cartoonist. And that's, we're very thankful to the Gallo family for making those available.
And again, this isn't just clipped from newspapers. This is the original artwork from the artists or from their families.
The original hand-drawn pieces that were then duplicated on the newspaper pages, yes.
Here's something a little bit unusual, I guess. We even have greeting cards, something that major league teams have done over the years. This would be issued at the holiday season, Christmas and New Year's. Tell us about this kind of an item in the collection.
Holiday cards have been part of the game going back to the early 1900s. We have, goodness, I would think several thousand of these now located throughout the archive. It's kind of fun to look at them, both from a standpoint of the topic that they would use, but also you get to see the different logos that the teams used and the different team names over time. And that, again, is something that the occasional researcher will come through, and they want to see the logos that the teams used in different publications or the different fonts that were used. Again, Hollywood producers come through to look at that. So when they're reproducing documents for use in a movie, they want to make sure they get the fonts right as well.
The phrase season's greetings, not used as much today, but for a long time, that was very common at Christmas time to say that.
Absolutely. In many cases, you had teams where there was Jewish ownership or with a large Jewish following, and they want to make sure that it was inclusive of everyone.
The elephant there, representative of the Philadelphia A's franchise, that goes back to the early 1900s. Then when Charlie Finley took over the franchise in the Kansas City and Oakland years, he got rid of the elephant, and then it came back after Finley sold the franchise. So both the elephant and Santa Claus represented there. Well, the photograph collection is a major, major part of what you all do, Jim, at the library. Hundreds of thousands of photographs, and I may even be underestimating at that. Picked just a couple that are kind of interesting because they're not just standard ball players in uniforms. Here we have Hall of Famer Satchel Paige wearing a suit, and I don't know if he's sitting in a rocking chair, but it's an interesting pose.
Yeah, the collection, not just on-field images, but the candid shots off the field, players with their families, players, particularly in the early days, standing next to their automobile when getting an automobile was a big thing. Players wearing, new suits, things of that nature. So again, there's no restriction on what we collect. Anything that we think will have an interest to a biographer or to our curatorial staff, we want to add those to the collection, and something like this is just fantastic.
Now, folks visiting the Hall of Fame, or maybe even in an online manner, can they purchase these photographs? And if they do, how can they use them? Are there copyright restrictions?
Yes, we do have a photo reproduction service, but we are very conservative in terms of following copyright law. We want to make sure that we don't sell something we don't have the rights to, or that we don't reproduce something that somebody is then going to use in violation of the intellectual property laws. So our staff does try to follow, the letter of the law when it comes to reproduction of things. But it is possible to purchase photos from our collection, both for professional and commercial purposes, such as a book publication effort, or newspapers will use our photos. And then we have people just buy photos for personal use. They want to frame them and hang them in their office or in their home.
So if we have the rights to a particular photograph and someone just wants to purchase it to frame and put in their den or their living room, they can do that.
It is possible. It depends. It's a photo by photo basis, depending upon what rights we have of the photo when the acquisition was made. In some cases, we get a photo and we're told we can't reproduce it outside of our own exhibits. Other times, people give us full copyright and say, you do whatever you want with it.
How about for book authors? Book author maybe needs to get 15, 20, 25 photographs for a book. What's involved there?
John Horn oversees the photo reproduction service, and he will work directly with the publishers in terms of setting up a fee structure for their use, but also making sure that any photos selected can be legally reproduced in the book. And there are different rules for putting a picture inside a book as opposed to putting it on the cover.
One other photograph that caught my eye when I was looking through the digital collection is a great shot of Moe Berg at the office back in 1929. And this photo was actually taken before we learned about some of his other areas of interest.
Yeah, Moe Berg is one of the more fascinating characters in baseball history. Princeton graduate. He also went to law school, and this photo was a publicity shot taken of him working in his law office, although I don't see how he's getting any work done with all those books open on his desk. But Berg was a student of languages, and depending upon what source you use, he spoke somewhere between 5 and 8 or 9 or 10 languages. I don't think we'll ever know the exact count on that. He was involved with taking pictures in Japan that were used supposedly in World War II, but then there are people who say, no, those photos weren't of any value. Photos he took during a 1927 tour of Japan. And then there, of course, he was a member of the OSS during World War II, basically working as a spy in the European theater. One of my favorite all-time quotes about baseball is from Casey Stengel, who said of Moe Berg is my catcher. He can speak 8 languages, but he can't hit in any of them.
Very true. He was also known as a bit of a hoarder, so I'm not surprised that he has all these papers spread out in front of him.
He read newspapers every day of his life. He would purchase them, and he would not let anyone touch them until after he read them. If somebody else touched them, they became used, and he would no longer look at them. So he was a unique character, to say the least.
We're continuing with Hall of Fame librarian Jim Gates. We will start taking your questions in just a few minutes in our chat room. A few more items, though, Jim, to talk about within the collection. Was only recently that the library essentially took over possession of the baseball card collection. That used to be considered part of the museum collection, but that's recently changed. And it's not just baseball cards of major leaguers. Here we have a player from the All-American Girls League.
We do have about in excess of 300,000 baseball cards. I think we'll learn an exact number as we proceed in the coming months. But they were transferred from the museum collection over to the photo archives because they are, they're photographs of players and managers and umpires, whoever else was included on a baseball card over the past 100 and some years. We are now actively working to get them cataloged and scanned and part of our digital collection.
Now, with this card, do you remember if this was issued during the All-American Girls League existence, or did this come out later?
As best I recall, there were no cards produced of the women during their playing career, but once the movie came out, there have been multiple card sets produced on them.
And this is a
And
player,
a lot of those cards are
Dolly
done
White.
in conjunction with the Alumni Association, and they're done as fundraisers to help, provide some income to the remaining women of the league.
Yeah. Shown here is Dolly Brumfield White, who used to regularly attend reunions at the Hall of Fame.
She came to Cooperstown several times, and I believe we had a picnic with her and a number of the other ladies once, and my kids were young at the time and got to go to the picnic and play catch and meet the women. So again, you just, the opportunities we have by working at the Hall of Fame are tremendous.
Another form of card that the library collects, lineup cards. This is one from July 2nd, 2012. It's not just any lineup card. It does have significance in that 3 Japanese players appeared in a game. I believe that was the first time that it ever happened in Major League history. Do you recall how the Hall got this lineup card?
Once upon a time, and we have lineup cards going back for decades, and we would go to the teams directly, but now Major League Baseball controls access to these cards, so we use our pipeline to the commissioner's office to acquire these. I do believe you're correct. It's a little small on my screen here at home, but that was the first time in a Major League game that 3 Japanese-born players appeared together.
A little bit of a close-up here. We see that Ichiro was leading off that game for the Seattle Mariners. And then on the right side, we see the lineup for the Orioles. And you see Jim Thome batting 5th and doing the DHing. So a Hall of Famer included there. Steve Pierce played in the game, Mark Reynolds, Matt Wieters, Adam Jones also was in the lineup for the Orioles that day.
And Adam is now playing in Japan.
That's right. Very good, yes. For the Mariners, we mentioned Ichiro. I believe that's Vernon Wells, if I'm not mistaken, was playing for Seattle at the time. Dustin Ackley, Sean Figgins. Kawasaki was actually one of the 3 Asian players who appeared in that game. Here's something a little bit off the beaten path. We talked earlier about hardcover and paperback books. The library has about 40,000 of those, but this is a different kind of book.
This comes under the category ephemera, which is a very broad category that includes basically anything we want to collect. Bazooka used to produce these little catalogs that you would get with the bubble gum, where you could go in and get gloves and bats and things like that. I'm not sure what is on the inside of this one, but when you had enough Bazooka wrappers, you could send them into the company and you could select your prize. And I believe that's what this catalog is.
Very cool, very cool. One of the things the library is very active is not just in collecting documents, as important as that is, but also staging events. And there really are 3 major events a year that take place within the library. The library is very much involved in organizing and hosting them. And I know a particular source of pride for you, Jim, is the annual symposium.
One of the goals and objectives of the library is to support scholarship at all levels. One of the ways we do this is our annual symposium on baseball and American culture, where we bring academics and historians and authors in for 3 days. It's usually the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday after Memorial Day weekend, which would be next week, but this year that was canceled, of course. But this is where these authors and researchers get to present the work that they've been doing. And it's art, music, poetry, literature, architecture, economics, civil rights, anything except baseball on the field. There are other programs for that, but the symposium is designed to to show how baseball has worked its way into our culture and society. And every year we don't have any problem filling up, all the sessions with presenters. And we get between 150 and 200 attendees each year. And it's a great event. Here you have Frank Deford, who was one of our keynote speakers. But over the years, we've been able to have George Plimpton, Roger Kahn, Brian Kenny, Elliot Atsenoff, John Thorne, writers such as Claire Smith and Ira Burko. So we've been very fortunate to have some notable keynoters. Dr. Carla Hayden was also a keynoter. And we've had, this year would have been our 32nd annual program. We're putting it off. We'll re-invite all the speakers again for next year, and we'll get to work on having it next year. We also have two other events that are fairly big. One is National History Day, and that is a middle school and high school program. It's nationwide, where students do history projects in a variety of categories. Cooperstown is the host city for the New York State Finals. It's the Fenimore Art Museum is the host institution. But each year, when the finals are held in Cooperstown, 3 different categories are held in the Hall of Fame. A number of our staff are judges. This goes back over 2 decades now. Again, unfortunately, it was canceled for this year, and we'll have to get back to it next year, we hope. And then there are different committees within the SABRE organization, the Society for American Baseball Research, which is headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona. But some of their committees will hold meetings in Cooperstown from time to time. But one of them is the 19th Century Baseball Committee, headed up by Peter Mancuso and Bob Bailey. And they've been meeting in Cooperstown for about a decade now. And that brings in about 75 to 90 scholars and researchers on baseball in the early days during the 19th century.
They are a particularly rabid group when it comes to the subject of 19th century ball.
That they are, and it's interesting watching these 19th century scholars try to use modern technology to present their research.
One more topic to talk about before we start taking questions in our chat room. There are ways that folks can do research through the Hall of Fame, through the website, people that are not able to come to the museum and the library. Both the museum and library do remain closed for at least the next few weeks. We're not sure exactly when they'll be reopened, but here we have the online library catalog. Tell us how folks can use this. I've been able to figure it out, so it's not that complicated.
Well, we originally started with a program called Abner, which just had the MARC records, the cataloging records of the books and periodicals. We've now expanded that into a system called Pastime. And there are 2 ways you can gain access, both of which, if you go to baseballhall.org, if you go to the bottom of the page, you'll see a red box that says online catalog. And if you click on that, it'll take you to this page where you can search books and publications. And you can do a basic search right there, or you can do an advanced search. But you can type in whatever you need, and you'll find out how many books we have that meet your needs. But you can also, at the top of the page, when you first go to baseballhall.org, there is access to Pastime, which will give you a search capability to look for all the documents that we have scanned and digitized. We are also wanting to put up oral histories, so you can sit there and listen to Cool Papa Bell talk and other documents that we have, both ephemera, publications, papers from the commissioner's office, anything that we've had a chance to work on. And we started with a small part of the collection, and that's growing every day as we add more material.
All right, very good. We're going to take questions. We've got a ton of questions already in our chat room, so we'll get to as many as we can over the next few minutes. We have one coming from David. Wants to know, can you provide information how academic researchers can gain permission to access specially archived materials?
Well, if you just send an email to research@baseballhall.org, Cassidy Lent will take a look at your question and get back to you as quickly as she can. We do everything we can to make it available. Sometimes we can make photocopies and mail them to you. We can scan and email things. There are different fees depending upon how much work is involved. Or you can visit Cooperstown once we're open again to the public, and you can make an appointment. We'll have stuff pulled and waiting for you when you get here.
A gentleman named Jeff Paul wants to know, what is the best temperature and humidity for signed baseball autographs?
Well, the best thing you can do is keep those between 60 and 72 degrees. Keep the humidity low, but constant. And if you're talking about ink on baseballs, you want to keep them in the dark. So don't put them in a ball cube and put them up on the shelf. Keep them in a box or in a drawer, and only pull them out when you want to show them to somebody.
Very good. Our old friend Jeff Arnett chimes in. Great presentation, guys. Does the library contain the original green light letter from FDR to Commissioner Landis?
We do have the original green light letter. I believe that is now digitized and available via Pastime as well. That's one of the great treasures of our collection. The original letter from FDR to the commissioner telling the commissioner that baseball should continue during the war.
Question from Michael Thorne. He wants to know, my father played minor league ball back in the early 60s. Would I be able to research his career at the research center?
It's possible, depending upon how long his career was and how many games he played. I would suggest the first thing you do is go to baseball-reference.com. There's a minor league database there that we use all the time. You can search his name, get his playing career stats and the teams he played for and all that basic information. We would have Spalding guides and other information that might have stuff on them, but we don't keep clipping files on all the minor leaguers. Once you determine what cities he played in, I would recommend you contact the historical societies or public libraries in those communities and to see what newspapers that they have that covered those teams during the time he played.
We have a message from Keith. Please tell us about your collection of material about ballparks.
Oh, goodness. Ballparks are a favorite topic for fans. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of books written about ballparks. We then have some personal papers. Janet Marie Smith, who was a guest on your show just a short time ago, she has donated her papers to us. We have blueprints for some stadiums, a variety of different documents, and of course, programs and scorecards from the various stadiums where teams played as well.
Question from Erin. She wants to know, what is the oldest document in your collection?
The oldest document we now have is something acquired only in the last several months. It's a piece of sheet music from the 1840s, which features a cricket match on the front cover. And because cricket is a stick and ball game that is connected to baseball, we kept it. That was acquired from the estate of Penny Marshall, who was very generous in her plans after she passed away. She made quite a bit of her personal collection available to us, and that was one of the treasures we acquired.
Very good. We'll take one more question from Mike Swartz. He wants to know about the most interesting person that you've met in obtaining an item for the library and archive.
Oh, goodness.
I'm assuming this is from a donor that you've met, somebody that's donated to the collection. Anyone in particular that really grabbed you?
Well, over 25 years, that is a very long list. I think in recent times, having talked to Penny Marshall over a decade ago about her collection and what we might be interested in, and then patience is one of the virtues in our business in terms of dealing with donors of material. Sometimes they don't want to give it to you right away. They say, wait, I'll give it to you later. And in this case, I held 2 or 3 conversations with Penny and was patient. And sure enough, after she passed away, everything she promised was made available to us.
Very nice. Penny Marshall, very active, of course, in creating, directing a league of their own. A huge baseball fan, also a fan of the All-American League as well. We've been talking to Jim Gates, our virtual librarian spotlight over this past hour. We want to thank everybody for jumping into the chat room. There were a few other questions that we just didn't have time to get to, but we do thank you for your interest and your enthusiasm. We also want to mention on somewhat of a personal note that Jim is going to be retiring in a few months after 25 years at the Hall of Fame. I believe it's coming up in October for you, Jim. What are you going to be doing next?
Well, retiring at the end of October. The goal is to move back to Gainesville, Florida, where I was at the University of Florida before I took this job. My mom lives down in the area, so it'll give me a chance to be closer to her. And my wife and I will just enjoy spending time down there and hopping up to DC to see our grandbaby and our daughter and her husband, and then up to New York City to see our son.
Very nice. Before you leave, though, we got to get you back in the museum and the library. Well, we got to get all of ourselves back there.
I am looking forward to getting back into the office, absolutely.
I never thought I would miss the office as much as I have these past 2 months.
I'm with you on that.
Well, Jim, it's been a pleasure. A lot of great information. We do appreciate your time. And of course, best luck in the retirement, though I'll see you between now and October. Thanks for being with us. Thank
you, Bruce. And I look forward. You got another program on Friday with Al Oliver, right?
That's right. Former Major Leaguer Al Oliver is going to talk about his relationships with people like Clemente and Stargell. He also played with Gary Carter in Montreal. We'll talk about Al's career. And that'll be our virtual Voices of the Game coming up on Friday. So thanks for promoting that, Jim. We appreciate it. We do appreciate all of you tuning in with us today. We also will have a program coming up on Thursday. That'll be our next virtual field trip that we'll be offering. I forget the topic because my main computer went out on me this morning and I don't have access to the files, but it is coming up. This Thursday. We'll have more about it at our education Facebook page, so be on the lookout for that. You can also find information about it at our website, which is baseballhall.org. We thank everybody for joining us, our virtual librarian spotlight with Jim Gates. Have a great day, everyone.